Yeah, that's
6:50.
yeah. It's not on the right time at all. It's in a different time zone.
Oh, I'm gonna blast on Facebook. Tell people.
host this evening is Dr. Diane Daniels Adoma of Diane Adoma's Consulting.
Welcome, John. It is such a pleasure to co-host Check-In this evening with Carmelita, and I am looking forward to learning so much more about your political platform.
Rich Wilkins, Independent Associate and Senior Director, Legal Shield Business Solutions, and the Motherless Daughters Foundation are supporting the Chamber this evening by sponsoring our Check-In podcast this evening. All proceeds benefit the Chamber's small business programs. Welcome to our legislative fireside chat as we check in with John Ossoff, U.S. Senate candidate for the state of Georgia. John Ossoff is a Georgia native, media executive, and investigative journalist. John, please tell us more about yourself. Welcome.
Hey, Carmelita. Hey, Diane. Thank you so much for having me, and really appreciate you creating this forum for us to discuss economic issues that impact our entire state. Appreciate investigations of war crimes, corruption, and organized crime for international television broadcasters. So, for example, in the last few years, we've produced investigations of sexual slavery by ISIS, human trafficking, undercover investigations of high-level bribery, murder for hire. We expose corruption and the abuse of power, and we then distribute this content on international content markets so it's seen by hundreds of millions of people in dozens of countries around the world. And I'm passionate about this work because I'm passionate about exposing wrongdoing and the abuse of power and corruption. And that's the same reason that I'm running for office right now at this moment in our history. We have a political system they're serving the narrow interests of their donors. We have a system that allows secret, unlimited corporate political spending. And that is why we see this extraordinary influence of lobbyists in Washington who pressure members of Congress whose campaigns they fund to enact policy that is often not in the public interest, but serves their narrow and well-lobbied interests.
Thank you, sir. What an impressive bio. You know, I am very honored to kick off our fireside chat series with you this evening. So let's move on to the first question. Healthcare workers are vital in fighting COVID-19.
Yeah, well, thank you for the well wishes for Alicia, and she is recovering well. She's actually been cleared to return to service at the hospital. She is now clear of the virus, and I'm grateful that she's made a full recovery. And my heart goes out to everyone who is suffering with this disease or who's lost family members or is having to weather such economic hardship during this crisis. And my gratitude goes to all the healthcare workers and everyone who's keeping this country running and as healthy as we can be during this unprecedented emergency. Thinking about COVID-19, Carmelita, I think we need to think first of all about the short-term strategy to contain the virus. And this is somewhere where the federal government's response, frankly, has been abysmal. What we've seen is the consequences of political leadership that fail to scope of the threat posed by this virus, the late action, the mixed messages on public health throughout this pandemic have terribly compounded the human toll and the economic toll and made containing the virus and promoting economic recovery more difficult. In the short term, policymakers need to implement public health advice. They need to have the strength to do so without pandering, without half measures, and without mixed messages. We need to be equipping our public health system and epidemiologists to prepare for what may be yet another surge in infection and hospitalization this fall, to solve the testing bottlenecks that continue to hamstring an effective response in too many places in the country, to get a tracing program up to speed that allows epidemiologists to understand where this virus is and how to contain it. Simply letting it rampage uncontrolled is not a strategy at all. And that is how we in this country are now approaching 200,000 deaths from this disease, when there are other major advanced industrial countries that have seen a far lower death toll, even after adjusting for population. In the long run, we've got to recognize that this disease has been able to prey so effectively on too many Georgians and too many Americans because we've neglected our health. We've neglected public health. We've allowed millions of Americans to be without health insurance. We've allowed millions of Americans to go without vital preventative medical care. Political leaders, and this goes back to the points that I made in the beginning of this exchange about corruption in the campaign finance system. Political leaders have allowed health insurance and drug companies to charge exorbitant prices, exorbitant premiums and exorbitant prices for vital medicine for so many years that many people have been unable to afford the healthcare that they need. So this should be a wake-up call. We've got to get to 100% health insurance coverage in this country. We need to expand Medicaid. Here in Georgia, we need to invest in the construction of more rural hospitals and expand the U.S. public health service so we solve the access problem.
Thank you, sir. Diane?
Yes. So, John, as you know, businesses are nonpartisan. So, if you are elected, John, what are 3 things that you would do to ensure that you're working across the table with all political parties, such as Republicans, Independents, the Green Party, and the Libertarians or any other party, to ensure that they also have a voice at the table once you are elected?
Thank you so much for the question. Well, first of all, I will make myself available to explain my votes, to account for my conduct in office, to answer criticism and tough questions. That, I think, is the bare minimum that a public servant owes the public. And, I don't know if my opponent, Senator David Perdue, is going to come on this program and talk with you, but he's not known for being accessible and transparent. He hasn't held a public town hall meeting in 5 years. I will bring a different kind of representation to this state. And I'm not always going to vote the way anyone wants me to, but I will answer questions about how I vote. And I'll always be open to hearing opposing views and working with anyone to try to craft policy initiatives that really serve the broad interests of diverse communities, diverse economic constituencies across this state. To be a partisan soldier. I'm not in this for the glory of any political party. My sole priority is delivering effective representation for the people of this state. And when I serve this state in the U.S. Senate, I will work with anyone in Washington who has this state's best interests at heart. And I will stand up to anyone who doesn't, regardless of their political party. So, I think we have a political system where too many elected officials proceed with blind allegiance to their party leaders and get so swept up in the partisan battle that they forget to step back and really ask themselves what's in the best interest of the people who pay their salaries and vote them into office.
Thank you very much.
John, talking about party leaders, one of the party leaders for the Democratic Party was John Lewis, and we send our sincerest condolences for the loss of your dear friend. We're all going to miss him. Keeping in mind his fight to remove social injustice, what are your plans to continue his work and make business opportunities fair and equitable?
Yeah, thank you for that. And you know, our whole state, our whole country, really the whole world is still grieving the loss of such a towering figure in our history, such a hero as John Lewis. And my first exposure to politics, to public service, to government in any form was when I was 16 years old and I read John Lewis' memoir of the civil rights movement, Walking with the Wind. And I was so in awe of what he had achieved in his life and what he went through and what sacrifices he had made that I wrote him a letter asking if I could spend some time working for him. And I didn't even expect to hear back, but he invited me to come and spend some time working for him. He took me under his wing. He became a mentor for 17 years. And the lessons that resonate strongest with me and the way that I feel his spirit living on in our presence most profoundly is on his insistence that the only way we get from here to there, and by there I mean building what he called the beloved community, a place where we recognize that poverty, violence, racism are folly, that the only way that we build true human flourishing, give everyone the opportunity to reach their potential and pursue their dreams, is if we recognize that what we have in common is so much more important than what divides us. And if we remain focused on how we're different from each other, and if we discriminate against each other, and if we bring bias and prejudice, that we can't achieve our human potential as individuals or as a society. And that's why I think at this moment in particular, we need healing and unifying political leadership in this country. Because after the last 4 years, we're as divided as at any point in modern American history. And that is distracting us from solving problems. Because the truth of the matter is we agree on a lot more than you'd think. Most Georgians, most Americans agree that every single citizen should have great health insurance. Most Georgians and most Americans agree we need to invest in infrastructure and clean energy and clean up our environment. Most Georgians agree we need to get dark money out of politics and clean up our campaign finance system. So given that there is that kind of broad consensus on policy, why are we so politically divided? It's because we don't have leaders who bring us together. We have leaders who try to mobilize support by appealing to mistrust and making us mistrust one another. And I look forward to bringing healing and unifying leadership to representation of this state in the Senate.
Thank you very much, sir.
So, John, as you know, Georgia is the #1 state to do business, according to Georgia Trend magazine. And Georgia is also the Peach State. It's the state where I was born. So it's also one of the top 3 producers of blueberries. If you are elected to go to Congress, how will you work with rural Georgia to ensure that we remain the #1 state to do business?
Yeah, I mean, we have such an incredible, thriving agricultural sector here in Georgia. And I look forward to working with Georgia's farmers and fighting for Georgia's farmers in the US Senate. And I think that if you look at the last few years, Georgia's farmers have gotten a raw deal. There was a vicious hurricane, Hurricane Michael, which devastated so much of our state's agricultural yields and productivity. And our farmers had to wait almost 2 years for the bulk of the federal emergency support. At the same time, the president's trade policy has caused foreign competitors to retaliate, targeting Georgia's farmers and America's farmers in a way that's done even more damage to revenues and access to markets. So, it's vital that if we face a natural disaster, Georgia's farmers get the emergency aid they need to rebuild instantaneously. It's vital that America's trade policy expand market access and help Georgia's farmers sell our agricultural products in greater and greater volume all over the world, rather than causing the imposition of retaliatory tariffs against Georgia's farmers, which make it so much more difficult for them to access foreign markets.
Well, I was not born in Georgia as Diane, but I was still allow it to be the #1 state to do business.
Go, Georgia, go.
So to follow up on the #1 status here, commercial and tourism, they're very important as well. They're very important. And the Paycheck Protection Program, which provides companies with resources to maintain their operating expenses such as payroll, returning furloughed employees to work, and covering applicable overhead, did not include the 501c6 nonprofits such as chambers of commerce, convention and visitors bureaus, and trade associations. Now, it's my understanding there's $130 billion left in the program. What initiatives will you sponsor to ensure during these uncertain times the program will provide all nonprofits with the same resources as other members of the small business community?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Well, first of all, Congress needs to return to session right away and reauthorize the PPP program so that small businesses can continue to access those funds which remain available in the program. And to your point, we need to do more to support the nonprofit sector at a time like this, because we're seeing both individual and corporate donations to community organizations, associations, coalitions, charitable groups plummet. And at a time like this, we need that leadership. We need these vital organizations to not just survive, but to be able to provide services to the public at a time of crisis. So I think that it's absolutely worth looking at what more Congress can do to support nonprofit organizations here in Georgia during this economic crisis. And in the meantime, the Senate should return to session immediately. I don't know why they think it's reasonable to take a 1-month vacation, given the state of the world right now. They should return to session immediately and reauthorize the PPP program in full so that those loans can continue to flow to small businesses who are so impacted by this economic crisis.
Thank you, sir.
So, John, I know you're a small business owner. So what small business task forces or think tanks, coalitions, etc., will you create that are new so that the small business community is represented locally in your district and is free to discuss common issues with you?
This is a great question. And when I think about what our state is really lacking in terms of the kind of infrastructure that brings people together and supports collaboration, it's strong leadership that allows community leaders, political leaders, and business people to collaborate more effectively across jurisdictions. We've got 159 counties in this state. We've had a growing cityhood movement, particularly around Metro Atlanta, that has carved out portions of various counties into individual municipal governments. A lot of folks from outside of Georgia don't know that the city of Atlanta itself, the official city limits, only contain a very small share of the overall metro area. And all of that makes coordination difficult when it comes to pro-business policies or investments in transit infrastructure. And so I think that we have obviously the Atlanta Regional Commission, which does an outstanding job. What I'd like to see is more collaboration across jurisdictional lines at different levels of government. And that will also support commerce in the area. And I hope to provide leadership to convene stakeholders at those levels when I'm serving in the U.S. Senate.
Thank you.
So, John, sometimes it's difficult to reach U.S. senators. What will you do to ensure that constituents will have better access to you or to your office?
Yeah, look, and I touched on this a bit earlier, but accessibility is what I'm all about. I mean, I'm here. I don't think my opponent's coming. And I'll be here to have these conversations when I'm in office. And I think that this is basic stuff, that if you are employed by the public, your salary paid by the taxpayers to represent the public, then the bare minimum obligation that you have is to be answerable to the people. And the contrast is so extreme when you consider that we have a US senator who apparently refuses to come on programs like this one, who hadn't held a public town hall meeting in 5 years, but who sells meetings to special interest groups for political donations. That's not the way the system is supposed to work. And that's not how I will work. And I've been holding monthly virtual town halls while we've been locked down, trying to engage in it with as many community leaders and community events as like this one, to be as accessible as possible. And I'll bring that same spirit of transparency and accessibility to my official work.
Thank you, sir.
So, John, education is the key to the airport region and also to the state of Georgia. What role do you support Congress fulfilling as it pertains to the schools responding to this pandemic, given its expanding negative impact on school district budgets?
Well, this is another aspect of the federal government's abysmal response to this crisis, was the failure to recognize the obvious, that school districts were going to need significant assistance to respond to this emergency, and that school districts that would be reopening in August and September would need that support and expertise to flow to them in May, June, and July. They just always wait till the last minute in Washington. It's like there's no forward thinking, no strategic thinking. And so here we are now, going on September. We've had this stop and start reopening here in Georgia. Obviously, a lot of school districts unprepared to meet CDC guidelines, and on the other hand, not fully invested in or unprepared to engage in remote learning remotely. So the bottom line is that Congress should have appropriated significant funds to assist local school districts pretty much right away when this pandemic hit us. And now we have to play catch up. And again, the Senate is out of session. The Senate is on vacation for reasons that no one understands at a moment like this. So the Senate needs to get back in session. They need to reauthorize the PPP small business program, and they need to appropriate substantial funds, better late than never, so that school districts like ours here in Georgia can either meet CDC guidelines for reopening with federal support or engage fruitfully in remote learning.
Thank you, John.
So, to continue with school districts, what are the principles that have and will guide your legislative actions and decisions relative to educating all of America's and Georgia's students?
Yeah, well, when it comes to federal policy for primary and secondary education, my top priority is going to be expanding access to pre-kindergarten and daycare with increased federal support for pre-K and daycare programs for two main reasons. The first is that we know that early childhood education has such an important formative effect on childhood development and can be decisive and extremely influential in how education proceeds later in life. The second reason is that so many working families, and in particular working mothers, struggle with daycare, with access to pre-kindergarten, with either the exorbitant cost of early childhood education or a simple lack of access. So I think we need more of a federal role in expanding pre-kindergarten and childcare programs. More broadly, and this is not a matter of federal policy, but more broadly as a matter of principle, I think it's time for us to look at breaking the link between a community's wealth and the resources available to schools. As long as those communities that have higher property values, where we're funding primary and secondary education through property taxes, are able to invest so much more in education than poorer communities, these cycles of inequity and inequality will be consistent. Every child in this country deserves the same level of investment in their future.
Thank you, sir. Diane?
Yes. So, John, what legislation would you develop to assist the small business community with financial issues that are caused by the pandemic or by weather-related incidents or market crashes?
That's a great question. And I want to set the stage like this. Right now, the federal economic policy is structured so that massive investment banks and huge corporations can access emergency support overnight, literally overnight. If Goldman Sachs suddenly faces a liquidity shortage or suddenly faces the potential of insolvency, or honestly, at this point, if they just ask for help, they'll get billions of dollars of support, either in the form of cash or very low interest or no interest loans instantaneously. And the same is true for a lot of major corporate borrowers. But we don't have a system in place to allow small businesses and households to access emergency resources in a time-efficient way. And that has hurt us so bad during this crisis, because the $1,200 stimulus checks, which, by the way, my opponent didn't want to send at all to workers, and the PPP program operated more slowly because there's not an existing infrastructure to get instantaneous help to small businesses and households. So if we're going to have this massive infrastructure that just flows instantaneous help when it's needed in an emergency or a financial crisis or a pandemic or a natural disaster into the banking system, then we should have the capacity to get immediate help quickly to households and small businesses too.
So John, you operate a small business that was founded in 1991 that exposes human trafficking. And what would you do to continue fighting this cause while in Washington? And if there's anything at all that you would like to tell our audience that we have not covered, what would that be?
Yeah, I mean, the scourge of human trafficking and modern day slavery and sexual slavery is an abomination. And it's widespread in this world. And some of the work that my company's done that I'm proudest of have been long-term investigative projects that expose those who traffic in human beings, who sell human beings, who enslave human beings. And, you know, there's been a lot of discussion appropriately this year about the vital need to strengthen civil rights laws and to reform our criminal justice system. And I think something that we should think about is, as we are embarking upon that vital work to reform our criminal justice system so that there are not race and class disparities in policing and prosecution and sentencing and incarceration, we also need to think about reprioritizing that high-level organized crime that runs rampant around the world with so many vulnerable and helpless victims. International human trafficking organizations, international money laundering groups, international arms trafficking organizations. You know, we are recognizing the need to change focus from criminalizing addiction or poverty and wasting so many resources with a system that often really brings down the hammer on people who lack means and lack connections. And instead, let's focus our law enforcement resources on the bad guys who are doing evil things at global scale and nationally across the United States.
Joining us this evening on Check-In, and you certainly have provided us with some incredible information that I think all the voters need to know. We know your time is very valuable, so again, the ATL Chamber, as well as Carmelita Scott, the president, and myself as a co-host, we just want to thank you so much again.
Thank you. My pleasure. And like I said, I'll be back here when I represent you in the Senate to continue this discussion and update you on what I'm doing for the people of the state and for our business community. Everyone take care, stay healthy, and thank you for having me.
Thank you. You're welcome, and you stay healthy as well. Okay, bye-bye.
They couldn't hear you. That's why I had to.